She was only 10 years old. No toys, no carefree laughter, just the steady hum of an old sewing machine. Her tiny hands, wrapped in bandages, pushed through the pain as if survival itself depended on each stitch. When a millionaire landlord came knocking for overdue rent, he expected excuses. Instead, he opened a door that revealed something far more haunting. A child working herself to exhaustion, carrying a weight no child should ever bear. But what he discovered next would not only change his life, it would uncover a truth his family had spent decades trying to hide. Jonathan Reed lived a life of numbers. To him, every apartment was just another line on a balance sheet, every tenant another signature on a lease. From his glass penthouse overlooking the city, success looked simple: collect the rent, grow the fortune, repeat. He was the kind of man who rarely looked past the paperwork, never wondering about the lives hidden behind each door. That was until one late afternoon, when he decided to personally collect on a payment long overdue. The building was small, worn down, and far from the polished boardrooms he was used to. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and old paint, the kind of place he never lingered in. But something about this visit felt different, as if the silence itself was holding its breath. He had no idea that on the other side of one peeling wooden door, a story was waiting, one that would shatter his understanding of wealth, family, and justice. Jonathan knocked, expecting the same tired excuses he had heard countless times before. But when the door creaked open, what he saw stopped him cold. Inside the dimly lit room sat a little black girl, no older than 10, hunched over a sewing machine. The air buzzed with the metallic clatter of the needle, her small fingers pushing fabric through with mechanical precision. Bandages wrapped her hands, blotched with tiny spots of red. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes, wide, determined, burned with something far greater than weariness. She looked up only briefly, startled by the towering figure in the doorway, then quietly pushed a folded envelope across the table. Inside was half the rent, crumpled bills and coins scraped together. "The rest," she whispered with her eyes, though no words came, "will come once the orders are finished." Jonathan's chest tightened. He had come for money. Instead, he had stumbled into a child's silent war for survival. Her name was Leah Johnson. Her mother, Clara, lay weak in the next room, too sick to stand, let alone work. The burden of survival rested entirely on Leah's shoulders, and the sewing machine was her only weapon. Day and night, she stitched to keep a roof over their heads. But every stitch cut deeper into her fragile hands, and the toll was written across her weary face. Jonathan left that evening shaken, yet unsettled by a gnawing guilt he couldn't explain. He had always believed poverty was a choice, that failure was self-inflicted. But the image of Leah, bandaged, trembling, unbroken, stayed with him. He told himself it was not his problem, that he was a landlord, not a savior. Still, the memory haunted him like a shadow. Days later, his phone rang. Clara had collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. With no relatives nearby, Leah had listed Jonathan, her landlord, as her emergency guardian. Confused, reluctant, yet unable to turn away, he arrived to find the little girl sitting alone in the sterile waiting room, clutching a bundle of fabric like it was her lifeline. That was when the system closed in. Social services threatened foster care. Bureaucrats spoke of procedure and policy, their tone cold, detached, as if Leah's life was just another case number on a file. For Jonathan, something inside snapped. He had watched enough, watched her suffer, watched a child carry the weight of a broken world. And for the first time in his life, he spoke words that even he couldn't believe had come from his mouth. "This girl is not going into a shelter. I'll take responsibility." But what he didn't know then was that Leah carried more than pain and resilience. Hidden in her mother's belongings was a truth, one that could dismantle Jonathan's entire legacy and expose decades of racial injustice buried by his own family's empire. And soon, Leah would place that truth directly into his hands. The boardroom was silent, but the silence was sharp, heavy, suffocating. Jonathan stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, the city skyline burning through the glass windows behind him. Across from him sat Margaret Vaughn, Cold, calculating, a board member whose influence stretched deep into Reed Properties. Around her, other executives shifted uncomfortably, sensing a storm about to break. In his hands, Jonathan held the evidence Leah had given him. Yellowed contracts, handwritten notes, and forged signatures. Documents that revealed a truth too long buried. Decades ago, his father had promised black workers like Clara shares in the company, only to have those promises stolen, rewritten, and erased. And one of the signatures that approved it all belonged to Margaret herself. When Jonathan laid the papers on the table, the room erupted. Denials, accusations, threats, executives scrambling to protect their fortunes. But Jonathan's voice cut through it all, trembling not with fear, but with fury. You stole from them. You built this empire on their backs. And today it ends. Margaret's mask cracked. She lunged, shouting that no one would believe him, that the company would collapse under scandal. But before she could finish, federal investigators entered the room, summoned by Jonathan himself. Every face turned pale. The fraud, the lies, the exploitation, it was all laid bare. For Leah, watching from the corner of the room, it was more than justice. It was proof that her suffering, and her mother's sacrifices, had not been in vain. For Jonathan, it was the moment his world split in two. The empire he had inherited, and the one he would choose to rebuild. The old Reed dynasty had fallen, but what came next would determine whether history repeated itself or was finally rewritten. The fallout was immediate. Margaret Vaughn's empire of lies crumbled under investigation, and the company Jonathan once thought was his greatest inheritance was revealed as a monument to injustice. But instead of running from the truth, Jonathan chose to face it. In a press conference broadcast across the city, he announced the rebirth of the firm, not as Reed Properties, but as Reed and Johnson Holdings. 40% of the company would be returned to the families who had been cheated, a reparations fund designed to right what had been wrong for decades. Beside him stood Leah, no longer the exhausted little girl at the sewing machine, but a symbol of resilience. Clara, slowly recovering her health, launched her own project designing school uniforms for children who could not afford them. And Leah began something even bigger, Threads That Unite, a community initiative that taught kids from marginalized neighborhoods how to sew, design, and build their own futures. What once was a story of pain had become a blueprint for hope. For Jonathan, the lesson was clear. True wealth isn't measured in square footage or profit margins. It's measured in the lives we choose to lift up, in the justice we're willing to fight for. His choice to take responsibility for Leah was more than guardianship. It was a declaration that the cycle of exploitation would end with him. But this story isn't just about one man or one girl. It's about all of us. How many more Leahs are out there right now, carrying burdens no child should? How many injustices are we willing to ignore until they force their way into the light? The question is simple, but the answer will define our future. What do you think? Was Jonathan's choice enough to heal the damage of the past? Or was it only the beginning? If this story moved you, make sure to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal the truths we can't afford to ignore.